everybody. I'm gonna do a couple little things here. I'm noticing it's getting a little choppy, but welcome. So I'm gonna try to multitask and change a few little oh, I hope I can change. We'll see if I can actually change the settings while I'm doing this, but welcome. If you have not been here before, welcome to MandoLessons office hours. You can ask questions. You can see what other people are working on. I love hearing what people are doing these days. What you're excited about, what you've been working on. I'll play some tunes, take requests, and I'll play them as long as I know them. Let me know how it's sounding, how it's looking. I have a feeling that the audio is a little out of sync because I never did a thing that I was supposed to do. But let me see if I can... Awesome. Jamie says, just learned My Darling Asleep. Great, one of my favorite tunes. How do I do what I'm trying to do here? I know there's something I can do. Sorry for the interesting start here. I don't remember exactly. Well, I might just have to... Oh, wait, no, there it is. That's what I want. What am I doing here? Ooh, Right Hand of John Reichman. I wish I could do that. You might have to ask John himself. Well, I can't figure out how to do what I'm trying to do, so I'm just going to hope everything is sounding and looking good and it's not too out of sync. Sorry, I'm running a little behind, but I'm going to catch up with the chat here. Welcome from Michigan, California, awesome. Spain, very cool. Mexico, all over the place. That's great. Little Muddy Farm asks if I'm feeling better. Yeah, I was out sick last weekend, but I'm feeling great now. Jamie asked, how old is this mandolin? This mandolin was built in 1924. It's it's a Gibson kind of base model. It's called the A Junior. It's kind of no frills. I got it beat up, so not too expensive, and there's no fancy inlay. It doesn't even say Gibson on the headstock or anything. No binding. Just kind of old, and I love it. Nice for Irish tunes. In my kind of nice for everything, but I particularly like playing Irish tunes on it. Cool. So I'm still seeing that I'm dropping frames here. Somebody, if it gets really out of hand, let me know. And if I'm really losing you, I can pause it and come back. Because it looks like I'm dropping too many frames for my own comfort. But is it, just a quick question, is it working out there? Is it sounding good? Is it in sync? Is it choppy? Is things going in and out? Can you hear me? Can you understand me? Things like that. Just want to get a read. Let me see. Am I on the right? Yeah, I'm on there. Cool. In sync. Cool. Well, I'll take your word for it. If it gets bad, I'll work on it from there. But I'll take your word for it that it's working good. Cool. Well, let me do a little more chat catch up here. More people coming in all the time. Thanks for joining us. If you haven't been here before, just because I see there's like twice as many people as I just said this, but welcome. Feel free to ask questions in the chat. I'll do my best to keep up with them. You can make requests, and I'll do them if I know them. And if they're not copyrighted material, I don't want my videos getting flagged, so I'll probably steer away from copyrighted material. But cool. All right, people. Washington, Spain, North Carolina, Portland. Which Portland? Oops, where did I go? Ireland, Missouri. Very cool. This is great. All right, so from Belgium. All right, Canada, Pittsburgh, DC. Cool. Well, I'm gonna do one more thing here, just Sorry again for the slow start, but just trying to keep things sounding as good as possible for everybody. Cool, got a question here from Aaron. I play a Gibson Epiphone MM20. Drops tune very easily within 5 or 10 minutes after tuning. What is the issue? Great question. So a little like mandolin maintenance question. Troubleshooting. It can be any number of things, unfortunately. Not a big deal. Sometimes I'm not particularly familiar with that particular instrument. Pretty much you have to kind of look at everything from here to here, kind of going up the middle to think about what might be affecting the tuning. Sometimes it can be the strings catching in the bridge a little bit if you're having tuning problems. If the slots in the bridge are too tight, it can catch the strings, and then you'll play and it'll kind of change. And the same thing with the nut. So make sure everything's kind of running smoothly between there. It could be your tuning machines. Often it's not tuning machines. The tuners on the back, in the front here. Usually those aren't the culprit, but I can't say for sure without taking a look at it. What I would do is ask over on Mandolin Cafe. There's a lot of people who really will do a lot better job of me at troubleshooting that sort of thing. Or you can bring it into a shop and see if they can troubleshoot it for you. It shouldn't be an expensive fix if there's something wrong. It could also be, I don't know how old your strings are. If your strings are really old, are either really old or really new, that can cause some problems too. So if you haven't changed your strings in years, change them. If you just change your strings and it's doing this now, you're probably just taking some time for the strings to stretch out a little bit. Hope that's helpful. How old is the Gibson that I'm playing? It is from 1924. It's a Gibson A Junior. Alright, so it looks like it seems like things are working alright here. Cool, well I'll play a tune here, but as always I love hearing what everybody's working on. If you got questions at any point, throw them out there. The first tune that I played, Irish tune called the Chordal Jig. It's on my website. It's Cordal. One of my favorite Irish tunes. Great for kind of adding some little chord melody bits into. But I'll play an old time tune here. I don't know what it'll be. Play Josio. Great old time tune. 3-part tune. a little Josio, one of my favorite old-time tunes of late. Actually, for years now, it's been one of my favorite tunes. I haven't made a lesson for it yet, but I should. It's a great tune. Fairly common. Okay. TAE 1000 ESD, apologies if there's some way to pronounce that, asks, do you have any tips on how to separate two notes in a line which are the same while playing tremolo? I think what you mean, that's a good question. Assuming like if you're playing a scale of I think you mean like that. Just a quick catch up on the chat here. Josio, yep, so it's JOSIE-O. Or -O. So I think what you're talking about is, rather than just like having one note, like how do you get from that note to another one? I think there's a couple things. I've never actually thought about this, so this is a great question. Thank you. I think one thing that I'm noticing myself doing is I'm kind of swelling the note, so it goes ba ba ba. So there's kind of a little bit of, I kind of mellow out the volume. A little bit. I think you could probably. That's a great question. I don't have anything. That's kind of stumped me there. It was good. I'll have to think about it and maybe get back to you. I think maybe what can help is if you have like a metronome going. I'll pull up a metronome real quick. If you have a metronome going, something to practice would just to, if you have that constant. Whoa, way too fast here. So if there's your metronome, hopefully you can hear that. So and if you can have those, if you can change your note on that click, that can be a good thing to practice. It doesn't mean you always need to be playing that way, because I think part of the beauty of tremolo is to kind of have that sort of flowy sound that sort of maybe isn't right on the beat and kind of floats along a little bit more. At the same time, I think developing the facility to actually really kind of nail those downbeats if you want to, and then you can make the decision to either kind of hit that note or lag behind it a little bit, or even kind of preemptively get to your next note before you should, just for kind of artistic effect. Cool. I got a little note from Dan, who's a subscriber. It says his grandfather played with Bill Monroe when Bill was in his early 20s. That's really cool. It's great to make those sort of connections. I love seeing that I see that a lot on YouTube comments of like watching like some of my favorite artists, and there's a comment of like, oh yeah, I'm Jimmy Martin's like great grandson or whatever it may be, or whoever. Especially in like the bluegrass and folk world, you're watching videos of your heroes and their younger relatives are posting on it, saying, "Hey, I'm related to this guy." Really nice to see that sort of stuff. So thanks for letting me know, and that's great. That's a really nice thing to know, I'm sure. All right, just gonna catch up with the chat here. Just learned if I only had a brain. That's great. That's a good one. I wish I kind of work my way through that. It'd be a good thing to work on. Okay, so I didn't maybe quite answer the question at hand on the tremolo. I had problem with melodies, which are 2 of the same in a row. I'm not sure that I quite understand. I apologize. But I think, you know, even if I'm not quite able to answer your question, I'm happy to keep trying, but I think, you know, I think whatever your problem is, like really defining, and this kind of goes for any sort of kind of technical difficulty you run up against learning to play an instrument, that whatever it is, you know, really like breaking down, slowing down what you're doing, finding out whether, you know, sometimes it's a right hand problem, sometimes it's a left hand problem. But sort of if you can really kind of get out your microscope and zoom in on what the problem is at hand, really being able to identify the problem. And I think you've got the right first step of just knowing there's a problem. A lot of times the hardest problems to fix are the problems that you don't know exist. And that's why it's really nice to record yourself, so you can sort of listen back and say like, oh, that doesn't quite sound how I'm envisioning it. Or things along that line. But, you know, identifying the problem is the first step. And then if you can really focus in and say like, okay, when is this happening? Is it in a tune? Is it in a song? Am I playing chords? And sort of the more you can get specific about when this problem is happening, the easier you'll be able to sort of figure out what the solution is. So I hope you figure it out. And if I'm also happy to keep trying. You know, anyone here can always shoot me an email, MandoLessons@MandoLessons.com, if you want to, or, you know, post a video on YouTube with your problem. I'll try to get back to them. Things like that. Always happy to try to help people out. Cool. Catch up with the chat here. Can I do Banks of the Ohio? Definitely. I'll do a little. I don't know all the words, but I'll do a little. I'll try to get one verse or something and a little bit of melody on it. That's my love to take a walk. Just a little way with me. As we walk, we will talk all about our wedding day. Darling, say, won't you be mine? In our home, we'll happy be. Down beside where the water flows, on the banks of the Ohio. Banks of the Ohio gets a little gory from there, which is unfortunate. Not the nicest of songs, but a beautiful melody anyway. If you want to hear one of my favorite versions of that song, as sort of disturbing as it is the Blue Sky Boys do a beautiful. The harmony on their version of that is just beautiful. Can't beat the Blue Sky Boys in my opinion on that one. Charles asks, I find myself resting the heel of my palm on the bridge when doing tremolo. Is that okay and or normal? Yeah, I think what I talk about a lot is as long as you're not locking anything down. You know, I think ultimately, like, whatever works for you is great as long as you're not really like stressing out any of your muscles or tightening anything up to the place where it's either affecting the sound or is like hurting you on a technique level, or a physical level. So I a lot of times do rest behind the bridge, but what I try to avoid is clamping behind the bridge. So if I'm resting behind the bridge, you can see my whole arm is still moving a little. You know, I still got a little bit of elbow in there. But at the same time, I'm kind of, you can, I might be making that sound a little bit. But if I lock my palm behind the bridge, then if you look at my arm, it becomes all wrist, and you see all these muscles kind of going wild in my forearm. And it also, for me, it affects, because I'm used to kind of not planting in that way behind the bridge and just resting. The sound is a lot more fluid. Whereas if I plant behind the bridge, it becomes all wrist, and I don't quite have the same facility. I'm a little more tightened up. And I've found over the years that if I am sort of tense, then the music comes out tense. And if I'm relaxed, then the music flows out a little more fluid. The most recent lesson I did on kind of melodic fluidity, it's not about planting in particular, especially behind the bridge, but I think I go over a lot of concepts of just sort of trying to, like, if at least having the facility to be fluid if you want, or to be more staccato, in that I'm talking about more kind of melodic lines of sort of having that fluidity versus both are great, but I think it's nice to practice both so you can have access to both. Like, that sort of more staccato stuff is great for bluegrass. But in an Irish tune, it becomes versus more kind of fluid sound for the Irish traditional stuff. That's a tune called Miss Monaghans. It's on my website. I'm 99% sure, but I do get confused sometimes. If you want to learn that, it's another one of my favorite Irish tunes. All right, back to the chat here. Yeah, so I'm gonna butcher this name here. Oh no. Manudateruel, apologies on that one, says natural playing is like walking. You're not thinking left foot, right foot every time. It just kind of comes out, and that's a great way to think about it. If you can become comfortable, kind of, and really not get to the point where you got to think about it at first. We've all been toddlers, kind of learning to walk, falling over a lot, but we get used to it. You can do the same thing with mandolin. It's gonna feel awkward at first, but eventually you'll get the hang of it. Ah, cool. Kevin says my dad has an old Gibson A. His favorite tune was Wabash Cannonball. That's a great song. All right, let's see. I'll catch up with. I'm sure I'm way behind on the. Whoa, yep, there it is. Way behind on the chat. Let's see. It always jumps on me, and then I lose my place. Can I play Delta Blues? Unfortunately, not really. No, I don't know much about the Delta Blues style. Rich Del Grosso, I'm sure. He's a great blues mandolin player. He might do lessons over Skype. He might not, but a lot of people do these days. And if you're really interested in the blues style, I would recommend getting in touch with him. Is Rich Del Grosso. I hope I'm saying his name correctly. I may not be. Whiskey before breakfast. All right, I can do that for sure. Who are the best mandolin bands to listen to? I mean, that's a good question. I have my own personal favorites. I talk about, at least recently in these things, I've been talking a lot about Caleb Clodder and Reeb Wilms from Foghorn String Band. And they also do some duo stuff, just as their names. Caleb Clodder, Reeb Wilms. And they do really nice stuff. Caleb's got a beautiful mandolin style, kind of Monroe-informed stuff, but really melodic, beautiful double stops all the time. Nice kind of folk, they kind of have you could maybe call it like a pre-bluegrass sound, but influenced by bluegrass for sure. They do a lot of kind of old country stuff, and they have a bunch of different projects that I love all of those. Really love Andy Statman. It's another one of my favorite mandolin players. But you know, there's mandolins all over the place. There's String Cheese Incident if you're into the jam band stuff. One of those guys plays a electric mandolin, so you can go all the way from that to Katarina Lichtenberg, I believe is her name. How to say her name? I'm not good with pronouncing names. Great classical mandolin player. Mike Marshall, Chris Thiele, David Grisman, all these guys. Check them out. I'm sure, you know, you can look over on the Mandolin Cafe. There's tons of resources for just... Check out the Mandolin Cafe. There's an MP3 section on Mandolin Cafe that's got, I think, thousands of songs for mandolin from a bunch of different genres. You can listen to them all for free. So just go over there. Check that out. Really a great resource. There's so much on Mandolin Cafe. Harvest, I can't learn Harvest Home as hard as I try. I find the rhythm really tough. Yeah. So, all right, I'm going to do a little Whiskey Before Breakfast, and then I'll talk a little bit about Harvest Home, and then try to keep up with the chat. Whiskey Before Breakfast. Hit that last note a little off. Yeah, there's Whiskey Before Breakfast. Classic. Great one. Love that tune. A request for Ashokan Farewell. I'm going to steer away from that one because it's written by Jay Unger. It's a copyrighted tune. And I don't want to play anything I shouldn't, but that's a great tune. There's lots of versions out there. Probably better than I could play it right now anyway, so... Maybe at some point, got to figure out the copyright thing. But okay, Harvest Home. Yeah, so my guess is in that tune. That's the spot that you're working on. That's the spot that gets everybody. So there's a couple ways to get through that little triplet section. What's going to trip you up, I think, is really your right hand. Because it's this sort of... What it kind of does is it goes into jig time for a little bit. So I've got some lessons on my website on how to play jigs, and you're using this pattern down, up, down, down, up, down, down, up, down. So it's down. It's little groups of down, up, down, and then another down, up, down. So you kind of have 2 downs in a row. Down, up, down, down, up, down, down, up, down, down, up, down. And that's really, I think, going to be the spot where because you have this little line of triplets, it sort of becomes a jig. So using that progression, using that right hand picking pattern can help you get through that. Because if you're just doing straight down, up, down, up, down, ups, you get down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. It works out in the end, but you kind of, the stress, I think, on those, you really get ba ba da ba ba da ba ba da ba ba da bum, which is, I think, kind of a nice way to emphasize that part of the tune. So if you go down, up, down, down, up, down, down, up, down, down, up, down, down. So getting used to that picking pattern. And I think I've done it both ways in the past. I probably still switch it up a little bit of just doing down, up, kind of getting some weird right hand just by staying on down, up, down, up, down, up. I would recommend really slowing it down and putting 90% of your attention on your right hand and sort of seeing what's going on, seeing if you can get that down, up, down pattern in your head and out into your fingers. That's my... And assuming that's the sort of spot in the tune that's giving you trouble. Cool. Lucy's playing along with the whistle. Glad to hear it. Oh, I lost my chat. Went for it again. Can I talk about, this is from Jado Bud. Can you explain mandolin chops and the sound and getting that sound, playing offbeat, and my take on raking styles? I don't know what you mean by raking styles. Oh, on raking strings. Maybe you mean breaking string? I'm not sure what you mean by raking strings. But yeah, so what I'll do is I'll send you, there's a if you go to my website and you go to the technique and fundamentals page, there's a lesson where I talk about chop. There's probably, I think, a couple lessons where I talk about like the various chop shapes, and then how to actually get that sound of that very rhythmic offbeat chop sound. So I'll just send you. I'll do a better job of me in the past explaining how to do that when I was really focused on that lesson. So yeah, go to MandoLessons.com, technique and fundamentals. Somewhere in there, or you can just search for chop, and you'll come up with a couple things on chop chords. So I hope that is helpful. And if that doesn't help, shoot me an email, MandoLessons@MandoLessons.com, and I'll help you out there. Are chops just used in bluegrass from Little Muddy Farm? Bill Monroe sort of pioneered that chop style, especially sort of the big, full, very... the sort of heavy-handed offbeat chop. That was definitely sort of a bluegrass thing to begin with. It's now used in a lot of different styles. You know, sort of, I think it sort of started out as a bluegrass thing. And there's some kind of old-time stuff that's a little offbeaty in terms of sort of what the mandolin's doing. But yeah, I would say it's definitely most closely associated with bluegrass. But you can try it in other stuff as well. Adrian Avery says, I'm a new player. I've watched quite a few right hand videos and focus on my right hand, but without an in-person teacher. How can I tell that my right hand technique is correct? What are some signs? In terms of signs, what I would say is, if it feels comfortable. I know that it might not feel comfortable, especially if you're just starting out on the instrument. Everything feels weird. If for anyone that's, even if you've been playing forever, if you ever want to feel what it felt like to pick up an instrument for the first time, if you're right-handed, just flip your mandolin over and try to play it backwards. That's what it felt like and it feels awful. It feels very weird. No matter how long you've been playing, even if you've just been playing for like a month, you swap it over and you'll see how far you've come, because that's what it felt like to pick up an instrument for the first time. One way to tell that you're right hand, what I can do sometimes is just play. You can either make a video recording of yourself, or just play in front of a mirror, play nice and slow, and just like stare at your right hand. It's a little hard sometimes because you're kind of watching yourself, and it can kind of throw you off. But if you're watching your own right hand, and make sure you're not like doing anything that looks really tense, your wrist isn't tense, you know, the whole technique thing, you can sort of get a visual idea of it. Another thing that I like to do is just sort of every once in a while, just drop my hands down to my side. Easier if you have a strap. You can put the mandolin in your lap if you don't. Just kind of put my hands down to my side, shake my arms out, kind of get back. And if you can develop this sort of ready position where you're relaxed, ready to play, you don't have any tension built up, then you can work on whatever you're working on, and invariably you'll get a little more tensed up. But then just come back to that kind of relaxed spot every 5 or so minutes, or even fewer, 3, 5, 10 minutes, whatever it is. And the more that you do that sort of practice of just like, okay, take a little like shakeout break, then the quicker you'll be able to like kind of get back to like, okay, now I'm relaxed, kind of start over. Because the more we play, especially in long blocks of time, you just get more and more tense kind of invariably. So that little kind of ready position thing, playing in the mirror, just sort of making sure if you get to the end of a practice session and you're like, your muscles hurt, and it's not just from like fingertips being tired from the beginning of learning to play and like developing calluses. There's a certain amount of like discomfort that comes from being a beginner at a new instrument, but it shouldn't be much. And really, you don't want to experience discomfort or pain when playing or after playing. Cool. Is Kentucky Mandolin copyrighted? I think so. I think that's a Bill Monroe tune. I also don't know how to play it. Yeah, I don't know. I know the tune, but I couldn't pull it out if my life depended on it right now. David Grisman Quintet. That's a great place to listen or start listening to some of David Grisman's stuff. Kind of classic dog music or newgrass repertoire in there. Michael Cleveland, awesome fiddle player, awesome mandolin player. Planksty, Andy Irvine, Paul Brady, things like that. Yeah, David Grisman, John. This is great. Yeah, people are great. Yeah, John Reichman, Jaybirds. Lots of great. If you're still looking for recommendations on mandolin players, just look through the chat. There's lots of great stuff in here. Randy says, I've made it a ways into your intermediate videos, and I'm starting to think about soloing and improv. How do you know when you're ready? Do you need to know all the scales and chords in the song? I would say, first off, go for it. I learned to solo and make things up and like take breaks and just essentially to play the mandolin from playing along with the pizza tapes, which is David Grisman, Tony Rice, Jerry Garcia, sitting around playing a bunch of old folk songs. And I would just sit there. And the great thing about playing along with recordings is they don't care if you hit a bum note. So I would just sit there and play stuff that probably sounded awful. But, you know, it was time on the instrument. It was me developing my ears of like, ooh, that didn't sound right. You know, like figuring out like, oh, they seem to be in the key of G. Like what notes are going to work. Like I'd say just like take off all the filters. Don't worry about bad notes. Just spend the time getting your fingers on the instrument and kind of pushing your own boundaries. You know, if you're in the intermediate stuff on my website, but like by all means, like go, like even if you've just picked up the mandolin, spend some time just like doing whatever, like kind of, for me, it took a little bit of just kind of getting used to playing wrong notes and like using my ears more than my fingers necessarily, you know, like let my fingers wander around, but use my ears to say like, oh, that worked. Oh, that didn't. Oh, let's try that again. And playing along with recordings or my play along tracks, you know, you can just like go to the guitar only of my play along tracks, whether you know the tune or not, and just listen and be like, okay, I'll just pretend this is a guitar player playing something I don't know. and just work on sort of like fitting in with that groove. Things like that. I think, you know, knowing scales and knowing chords is helpful, but I think it can really be secondary. If you can sort of figure out what key you're supposed to be in, and then using your ears, start with the melody. You know, when I take a bluegrass solo to this day, I usually start with the melody and then kind of embellish the melody, add some double stops, add some little chord bits, throw in some faster sections. But usually starting with the melody is a great way to go, in my opinion. Hope that's helpful. I'm just going to catch up with the chat. Whoop, there it goes. It's always jumping on me. Okay. Apologies while so somebody's asking that I should send Jay Unger an email. I have actually a couple of years ago I did send him an email and never heard back, but it's kind of on my list of things to do to figure out sort of how to do some of the copyrighted stuff in terms of Ashokan Farewell. Cool. Hey Jim, any advice? So Jim asks, any advice on how to practice chords and change chords fluidly? Yeah. So chords are an interesting place because it's kind of requiring you to play a bunch of different, like all your strings potentially at once. So, you know, if you're in G, it kind of becomes, muscle memory after a while. But, you know, if I'm changing from a G chord and I want to go to a C chord right here, you know, I need that C chord right now. But if I'm playing sort of that bass strum style, there's still notes I can hit while I'm changing to the C chord. So both the G chord and the C chord have this open low G string. So I can go like this in super slow motion. It's kind of... So I hit that G, low G note. It's kind of a bass note for my C chord. And then back to G. And I don't need to have the next chord down all the way. I can sort of hit that open bass note. And then, like, while it gives me time to get the rest of the chord down. And it's sort of a weird kind of theoretical thing to think about at first. But if you really think, like, okay, what's an important thing that I really want to get? Often it's the lower string. So if I wanted to go to, like, this C chop chord, 5, 2, 3, from my G chop, which is, so if I'm going like this, I say, okay, I really got to get that bass note. Often the lowest note is really going to define that chord, and it's sort of the first thing you're going to strum through just because your pick's going from top to bottom. So identifying like the lowest note you're going to hit and making sure that finger gets down first, because you're asking a lot of fingers to move all at the same time. So if you think like, okay, that's the first important one, and then that's the next important one, and then that's the next important one, it gives you just that little microsecond to get all your strings down. And even though you don't have the whole chord down at that beat that you should really have it, by the time your hand actually makes it through all the strings, you've got a little bit more time to... So, like, what I can actually do if I do this slow enough... I don't know if that's helpful. So that's how much time that I have. Something like that, where when I did this with my hand, you can sort of see that that's kind of how much time I have by letting that bass note ring out. And rather than doing that with your hand, I would recommend like taking that time to get your hand into your next chord position. And repetition, I think, is really helpful. Playing along with some play-along tracks or a metronome and really just working on that solid beat. I've been lucky to have a lot of time really just focusing on chords. I've spent probably a year of like combined hours of my life just playing like 1-4-5 chords on various instruments. But another thing that could help is, you know, like pick if you've got a guitar lying around or can find a cheap guitar or borrow a friend's guitar, spend a couple hours just like learning a couple guitar chords, and it'll help your mandolin playing immensely. Just because guitars are sort of like the quintessential chord making musical machine. Dean asked, what about Jerusalem Ridge? Working on it now. Yeah, that's another one that's a copyrighted one. I'd love to make a lesson for that. It's on my list once I figure out the copyright side of things. Hello from Ireland, from Joe. Thank you. Thanks for joining us. The Pelican 3 asks, any tips on using the ring finger and little finger to mute top strings while chopping? I see people doing that, but can't figure it out. So I think maybe what you're like talking about is sort of doing this kind of thing. Like often kind of in like the Sam Bush chop, which is more of just kind of like it's a funkier chop. It's 2-2, G string on the 2nd fret, A string, D string, 2nd fret, and then open, open. You get this kind of power A chord. And then what you can do, this is a good practice for those two fingers, is you can mute, rather, if you just do the classic chop thing, you go, and these two strings keep ringing because they're open. The way chop chords work is you kind of have to have all 4 strings covered. But if you don't, you can still use 2 fingers or 1 finger or 3 fingers to mute the strings above. So a nice practice would be to get that chord 2-2 open open, kind of A power chord, and then let it ring out, and then just kind of let your hand fall on the strings. It needs to be hard enough that it mutes all the strings, but not so hard that you kind of fret. If you hit too hard, it sounds like this, which isn't the sound you're looking for. And if you don't go enough, you still get, or you don't mute all the strings. So you're just kind of looking for it, and do it super slow. And then you can speed it up. And then sort of get it to that chop. You know, then you can play with how much time you actually leave in there. That's cool. You can shorten it up a little bit. And then you get into some sort of Sam Bush syncopations. Things like that. So, but it really all starts with just getting those fingers. It's a weird motion, and just doing it super slow, getting those fingers used to doing that funny thing. Awesome. Henry's joining from Boston. Thanks for jumping on the chat. Richard says, would love to learn Neil Gow's Lament. Me too. That's a tune that I kind of know a little bit of. I play it sometime in Irish sessions, but I don't really know it well enough to teach it. But I should put that on my list. I think it's actually already on my list, so it'll show up one of these months or years. I'll add a little tick next to it that says that it's been requested. Dan Love says, enjoyed Tone Poems. Yeah, that's a great Tone Poems and Tone Poets are some David Grisman albums where they play a bunch of beautiful old vintage instruments. Really, really great sounding albums. Stephen from Manchester, UK, thanks for joining us. He asks, how often do you need to change strings and what type of strings do I use? I change my strings a lot because I change my strings probably once a month or more in the summer. There's some time in the summer where I'm just like playing 8 hours a day every day, teaching at camps for like a month, and I usually have to change my strings in the middle, like after 2 weeks, because I'm outside and they're just covered in dirt. But in the winter, sometimes if it's a slow time, I might go 2 months. But really, don't change your, like, some people change their strings like once a year. Really, whatever. If you find that your mandolin doesn't sound in tune when it used to, and it's not any of the other problems that can make a mandolin not sound in tune. Sometimes the strings just kind of lose their oomph and don't sound as good. They stop being in tune. Your mandolin might start getting a little buzzy. Things like that. So if you're finding problems, or your mandolin just is sounding kind of rubber bandy and like it doesn't have the sound that you associate your mandolin sounding like, change your strings. I often, I change my strings, and the next day I don't really like how bright and like sparkly they sound, but eventually, a couple days in, they stretch out and get used, and then it's a nice sound. Some people love that kind of brand new string sound and change their strings right before shows. If I'm going to do a show or do a recording project, I usually change my strings like 4 days to a week in advance, just so I don't have that really kind of, to my ears, kind of harsher sound of brand new strings. But I use, and whenever I talk about gear, I just like to say that I'm not sponsored by anybody. I just buy all my own stuff. I use Diodario, I don't know how to say the name. I recommend, they're now called EJ74s, or J74s. They're just the medium gauge mandolin strings. I use J75s, which is a slightly heavier gauge, EJ75, slightly heavier gauge. On this I'm actually using is J74s. On the mandolin I use in all my lessons, my Ellis, I use the heavier gauge. Although I changed my strings recently and accidentally put on 74s. Not a big deal. I like the 75s. I can play them a little harder. I play pretty hard, and they fight back a little more. If I have light enough gauge strings and I hit it too hard, it just kind of goes, I give up, and kind of gets a little buzzy and doesn't sound great. But with a little heavier gauge, I can really push it a little bit, which I like to do. Cool. Richard says, met Jerry Garcia, used to live in, oops, there goes the San Fran in the 60s. That's awesome. Can anyone explain mandolin cuts from J. Doe Bud? I was saying your name right. I don't know quite what you mean, but maybe somebody here can help you out. Chad says, anyone feel like their fingers are too large for the mandolin? I have a cheap Rogue. Anything with a wider neck out there? One thing I'll say to that end, I have fairly long but skinny fingers. But check out Mike Marshall. That man has enormous hands, to put it lightly, I guess. And he plays a skinny-necked old Gibson from the same era as this one. And he certainly makes it work. That said, a lot of people do like wide neck. I know Collings makes a wide neck. It's not a cheap mandolin, a couple grand. But I don't know of anyone... There might be some other ones out there that are a little cheaper, that are wider necked. That's a great question for the Mandolin Cafe. So, say I'm looking for a wide neck mandolin on a budget. I'm sure somebody will be able to point you in the right direction. Cool, Cheyenne's here. Thank you, Cheyenne, for your recent Patreon support. That popped up in my email yesterday or the day before. I appreciate it. Yeah, Amanda says, love Sam Bush. Me too. He's one of my favorites. When you go from a G chord into a C chord, I assume, what is a good C lick? I don't know if I can come up with anything off the top of my head. Oh, here's one thing that I love to do. I use this all the time. If you're on this works for a G or a C chord. Let's start with a G chord. So you have kind of 2 and 3, 2 on the A string, 3 on the E string. You can move that to 3 and 5, open, 3, 5. and then open, open, 5, 7. And then back to 3, 5. And then back to 2, 3. So a little more up to speed, it sounds something like this. Maybe a little Rod Stewart-y, Maggie May. Or, no, that's a different... What am I thinking of? Something else. C chord, you can do the same thing. So open 2, 3. Open 3, 5. Open 5, 7. Back to 3, 5. C. That's some bluegrassy tune. It's not Gold. Is it Gold Rush that does that in the B part? I can't remember. But anyway, if you're going from G to C, so I was doing that with like Banks of the Ohio. Take a walk, just a little way with me. As we walk, we would talk all about our wedding day. So I use that, you know, put some of that in there. It's kind of a classic mandolin lick. I love that sort of stuff. Hope that's a helpful lick. I hope that's what you were asking for. Cool, Carl from Las Vegas. Thanks for joining us. I'm about to sign off, unfortunately, but thanks for joining. Henry asks, "Are you a fan of Appalachian Mountain dulcimer music?" I love the sound. I don't really know much about them. Some of my friends here in Maine play dulcimer. It's a really beautiful sounding instrument. Yeah, very. There's a great album. You should check out. What is it called? Is it Coal Holler? I'm gonna look this up here real quick. What is the name of this album? So Jerry Milnes has an album called Hell Up Coal Holler. And it's a great album of fiddle and dulcimer. Kind of a dulcimer backup to fiddle music, and it's beautiful. It's really a great album. I haven't listened to it in a while, but check that out. Jerry Milnes. It's GerryMilnes. And you should be able to find that album. One of my favorites. Oh yeah, Brown Eyed Girl. That's what I was getting in my head there. Thank you, Jamie. Roanoke. I wish I could pull that one out, but I don't know how to play that one. I'm bad on my classic bluegrass repertoire. Cheyenne says, I've seen old Gibson A styles that have wide necks. They go for about $1,500. Oh, those are the ones from like the 30s and 40s, maybe 50s. I think I've seen some of those as well. Yep. So I gotta sign off here now. I usually go from noon to 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, and it's a little after 1, so I gotta sign off. But yes, I will play Wayfaring Stranger as a little outro. So I taught it. If you want to learn it, there's a lesson on mandolin on MandoLessons, where I teach the melody in E minor, but I'm gonna play it in G minor, which I learned from. I think it's a David Grishman and Sam Bush duo album. Great one to check out if you haven't seen it. But I'll play that. It's a really beautiful. I'll see if I can still get it out. Try to sort of get something based on that version out here. G minor, Wayfaring Stranger. Where is that? Oh no, it's been too long. Yeah. Well, don't have it as much as I used to, but there's more or less Wayfaring Stranger. Cool. Okay, nice. Let me just catch up real quick with the chat before I sign off. But cool. Yeah, thank you all so much for joining in today. Hope the video was alright. It seems like I've got some figuring out to do. Seems like it was cutting out on my end, but hope it was at least watchable on your end. I am going to Maine Fiddle Camp this summer. I'll be there. If you're in the Northeast, I highly recommend. You're into fiddle tunes, I highly recommend checking out Maine Fiddle Camp. I've been teaching there every year for 10 years now. One of my favorite places to be. I'll be there all summer. Yep. Hope to see some of you there. But yeah, thank you all so much. Thanks for joining in, and see you next time, next week, assuming all goes as planned. But yep, have a good rest of your weekend, and see you all again soon. Bye-bye.